despair, and all the other things they did. And then she tried to invent herself as a domestic goddess with her As Ever Netflix series, which crashed.
Sources familiar with Bauer's research are now claiming something extraordinary. That buried inside the legal paperwork surrounding Harry and Meghan's marriage is a clause, one that Harry did sign without knowing the consequences or what it stood for. Title rights, money, the children, all of it allegedly locked in Meghan's favor before the wedding flowers had even wilted. Harry thought he was signing standard documents. Sources suggest he was signing something else entirely. Tom Bauer allegedly knows exactly what it says. And now, so will you without any blockage. The man who keeps uncovering the uncomfortable truth.
Welcome the thought that he then dishes the dirt, but also because Meghan has got her ability to make people feel fearful. Well, he does it because he needs a profile. That's the only way they can get money, by showing the profile. And for Netflix, everything is built around the future documentary series.
Relationships, never thinking that they could have something to do with himself. So he's a very complicated, depressed.
In the summer of 2022, a book landed in British bookshops that made a lot of very powerful people extremely uncomfortable. It was precise in its dealings, not because it was sensational, not because it was tabloid gossip dressed up in hardback clothing, because it was researched. Tom Bauer spent 18 months on revenge. He conducted over 80 interviews. He spoke to palace insiders, former royal staff, Hollywood contacts, and people inside Meghan's inner circle who had never spoken publicly before. He cross-referenced. He verified. He pushed sources until they gave him specifics rather than impressions. He wanted to be sure he had the right information. The result was the most forensically detailed account of Harry and Meghan's story that had ever been published. And according to sources familiar with his ongoing research, it was not the complete picture. Here is the question worth sitting with before this story goes any further. If Bauer published 80 interviews worth of material and still held certain things back, what exactly was he keeping away from the public? And why is it coming off the public scene now? That question matters, because the answer allegedly changes everything. First, understand who Tom Bauer actually is. People who only know him through the royal coverage sometimes assume he is a specialist, a royal correspondent who found a niche and stayed in it. That is not his background at all. There was something else behind that explains. Bauer spent decades as one of Britain's most feared investigative biographers. His subjects have included Robert Maxwell, the media mogul whose fraud empire collapsed spectacularly after his death, Richard Branson, Simon Cowell, Gordon Ramsay, and Tony Blair. These are not easy targets. They are people with serious legal resources, serious public relations machinery, and serious motivation to keep their private lives private. Bauer went after all of them anyway, and in every case, he found things they would have preferred stayed hidden. He was specifically gifted in this area. His methodology is specific. He does not rely on single sources. He builds pictures from multiple angles simultaneously. He finds the people on the edges of a story, the assistants, the former colleagues, the advisors who left under difficult circumstances, and he listens to what they say when the cameras are off. He is also, and this matters enormously, a lawyer by training. He understands documents. He is fully aware of all legal language and how it affects a particular matter. When Bauer turned that methodology toward Meghan Markle, the result was Revenge, published July 19th, 2022. It debuted at #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list. Meghan's legal team disputed certain claims, but the book stood. No successful legal action was brought to remove it from publication. That tells you something important. Bauer's sourcing was solid enough to withstand the scrutiny of Meghan's lawyers. And Meghan's lawyers are not people who miss things. Now here's what sources familiar with Bauer's research are suggesting. The published book represented what Bauer could verify to the standard required for publication at that specific moment. But investigative research does not stop when a book goes to print. Sources keep talking, new information surfaces, details that were too sensitive or too legally complex to include in an initial publication sometimes find their way into the conversation later. Sources suggest that certain material connected to the legal architecture of Harry and Meghan's marriage fell into exactly that category. Too specific, too legally sensitive, too potentially explosive to include without additional corroboration. However, it was impossible to remain in the dark forever. The specific claim now circulating among sources familiar with Bauer's research is this: that the legal paperwork surrounding the Sussex marriage contains a clause, not a standard agreement, not the kind of boilerplate legal language that surrounds any high-profile union. Something deliberate, something specific, something allegedly drafted by Meghan's American legal team with a precision that sources describe as extraordinary, and something that Harry allegedly signed without fully understanding its implications. Now stop for a moment, because that claim raises an immediate question, one that needs an immediate answer. How does a grown man, a man who has navigated the machinery of the British royal family his entire life, sign a legal document without understanding what it contains? The answer to that question requires understanding something about who Harry was in the months leading up to that wedding, not what everyone saw, but who he was after the lights and glamour were put down. A man who had spent years feeling trapped inside an institution he resented. A man who had finally found someone who made him feel seen in a way royal life never had. A man who was, by multiple accounts from people who knew him during that period, deeply connected to Meghan in unimaginable ways. That emotional state, sources suggest, was not an accident. And the people who drafted that legal clause allegedly understood it better than Harry did. How they used it, what the clause specifically contains, and why sources say its implications are only now becoming impossible to ignore. That is where the story gets interesting. So many undercover to unravel. The marriage that moved too fast for anyone to keep up.
Harry and Meghan, the vows you are about to take.
November 27th, 2017. Kensington Palace released a short official statement. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were engaged. The announcement was clean, formal, and carefully worded in the way all royal announcements are. But what was missing was the pace at which everything got there, because the timeline, when you lay it out plainly, is striking. Harry and Meghan went on their first date in July 2016, a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. By his own account in various interviews, Harry knew almost immediately that something was different about this woman. Within weeks, they were seeing each other regularly. Within months, the relationship was serious enough that Harry was flying to Toronto, where Meghan was filming the legal drama suits, just to spend time with her. It happened within a twinkling of an eye, shortly after they got engaged in the autumn of 2017, barely 15 months after they met each other. 18 months after that, they were married at Windsor Castle in front of 600 guests and a global television audience of nearly 2 billion people. But here's the question those in the palace did not think it was necessary to ask at the time. In those 18 months between engagement and wedding, what legal groundwork was actually laid? Who was reviewing documents on Harry's behalf? And was anyone truly looking out for his interests, specifically not the monarchy's interests, not the palace's interests, but Harry's? Sources suggest the answer is deeply uncomfortable. Troubling if you looked further. To understand why, you need to understand the environment Harry was operating in during that period. He was in love, genuinely, visibly, completely in love in a way that people who knew him during that period describe as unlike anything they had seen from him before. Meghan was different from anyone he had dated previously. She was confident, articulate, and purposeful. She had built her own career entirely independently. She had a life, an identity, and a sense of direction that Harry, still searching for his own place within a royal institution he had complicated feelings about, found magnetic. But that emotional intensity had a practical consequence, one he never envisaged at the time. Harry was, by multiple accounts from people close to him during that period, distancing himself from those who had once given him the best of advice. Long-standing aides found their access to him narrowing. Friends who raised gentle concerns about the pace of the relationship found those concerns were not well received. Bauer's research documented this pattern in detail. In Revenge, he described how Harry's circle contracted significantly during the engagement period. People who had been part of his professional and personal life for years found themselves on the outside looking in. That contraction matters enormously for what allegedly came next. Because while Harry's traditional support network was shrinking, another team was growing in influence around the couple. Meghan had arrived in the United Kingdom with existing professional relationships in place. American managers, business advisors, and legal contacts developed over years of navigating Hollywood's entertainment industry. People who understood how to structure agreements that protected their clients' long-term interests in complex, high-stakes environments. These were not royal lawyers. They did not operate by the conventions of the palace legal apparatus. They operated by the conventions of Hollywood, where agreements are negotiated with precision, where every contingency is anticipated, and where the question of what happens if everything goes wrong is asked before the ink is dry on what happens if everything goes right. Sources suggest this team was involved in the legal documentation surrounding the Sussex marriage in ways that were not standard for a royal union. Now, this is the part that sources say is critical. In a standard royal marriage arrangement, the palace legal team would be involved centrally in reviewing any significant agreements. Senior advisors with decades of experience navigating the specific legal complexities of royal life would be across every document. Sources suggest that there was something wrong in the way Harry and Meghan's case was handled. Whether that was because Harry's distancing from palace structures meant the usual oversight mechanisms were bypassed. Whether it was because the pace of the wedding preparations left insufficient time for proper review, or whether it was because Harry actively resisted what he perceived as institutional interference in his personal life. It was obvious that they had missed one or two in filing for the legal proceedings, and in that gap between what should have happened and what allegedly did happen, a document was signed. A document that held delicate details covering 3 distinct areas, each one more significant than the last: the title, the money, and the children. And Harry, surrounded by people he trusted completely, allegedly put his name to all of it without appreciating what each of those 3 areas represented in practical terms and the damage it could cause if anything goes wrong. How the clause was structured, what the details were, revealed a lot about those who penned all of it. This is what comes next. Inside the clause, title, money, and the children.
I've been asked to read out a statement on behalf of the Duke of Sussex and Lord Watson. In a monumental victory today, as you know, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, couldn't be present today. However, he's prepared statements.
A lawyer once said something that every person who has ever signed a document without reading it should hear. The most dangerous line in any legal agreement is never the one written in bold. It is always the one buried in the middle of page 11 that nobody bothered to read because the first 10 pages seemed reasonable. Sources familiar with the alleged Sussex legal agreement suggest whoever drafted this particular document understood that principle extremely well. At least, he shouldn't be a novice. Because the clause, as sources describe it, is not dramatic on the surface. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with flashing lights and warning signals that would make even a distracted signatory pause. It was intentional, and every strand of its language showed layer by layer the intentionality behind those who wrote it. Those circumstances, sources suggest, may be arriving now. Let's go through what the clause allegedly contains, because there are 3 distinct elements and each one builds on the last. The first is the title. Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex on the 18th of May 2018, the moment she and Harry were married at Windsor Castle. That title was granted by the royal family. It is connected to Harry's status as a senior royal, but Harry's status has changed significantly since then. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced their intention to step back from senior royal duties. By February 2021, that step back became permanent. The couple relocated to California, and their working royal roles were formally removed. They didn't give specific reasons. The question of what happens to Meghan's title in the event of a divorce has circulated in royal commentary circles ever since. Sources suggest the alleged clause addresses this question with striking specificity. According to those familiar with its alleged contents, The agreement contains provisions allowing Meghan to retain the Duchess of Sussex title for commercial purposes, regardless of marital status, not as a courtesy, not subject to royal family approval, but as a contractual right. Think about what that means practically. The Duchess of Sussex title is not simply an honorific. In commercial terms, it is a brand, a globally recognized identity attached to one of the most famous women on the planet. Its value in the context of media deals, product partnerships, and public platform building is significant and measurable. Sources suggest that value was understood clearly by the people who drafted this agreement, and they allegedly did everything to protect their interests. That is element 1. Element 2 is the money. Sources describe an alleged financial structure within the agreement that is tied to 2 specific variables: the duration of the marriage and Harry's earnings during that period. The framework, as sources describe it, is escalating. The longer the marriage continues, the larger the alleged settlement figure becomes, and that figure is allegedly calculated against Harry's total earnings across all sources during the marriage, his inheritance, his memoir advance, his Netflix and Spotify deals, his speaking fees. Every year the marriage continues, sources suggest the financial clock ticks in one direction only, leaving only one person with regret should anything happen. Now, here's what makes this element particularly significant in the current moment. Harry's earning power has grown substantially since the couple moved to California. The memoir Spare, published in January 2023, generated an advance reported at around $20 million. The Netflix documentary series added further significant income. Speaking engagements and brand associations have continued. If the alleged escalating structure is accurate, the financial implications of a divorce today are considerably larger than they would have been in 2019 or 2020. Sources suggest that there was nothing accidental about the escalation. That is element 2. Element 3 is the one that sources describe as the most significant of all: the children. Archie Harrison was born in May 2019. Lilibet Diana was born in June 2021. Both children were born during the period when Harry and Meghan were transitioning out of royal life and establishing themselves in California. Both children grew up walking the shores of the United States. Sources suggest the alleged clause contains a jurisdiction mandate, specific language establishing that any future custody disputes involving Archie and Lilibet must be resolved exclusively under California family law. Not British law, not a royal convention, California law. The implications of all of this require intelligence to overstate. California family courts operate entirely independently of the British royal family's preferences, traditions, or institutional concerns. A California custody determination would not defer to royal protocol. It would not consider the monarchy's interests. It would apply California law and nothing else. Sources suggest this element of the alleged clause effectively places the children permanently beyond the reach of the British royal family in any future dispute. Beyond Charles, beyond William, beyond the institution entirely. And Harry allegedly signed it. He allegedly didn't understand the details behind his signature and why he allegedly did not understand what he was agreeing to, who was in that room, and who was conspicuously absent. That is the part that sends shockwaves to sources until you get the full picture of what Harry was facing during the final months before the wedding. How Harry allegedly never saw it coming.
I think it's probably too soon to tell and too soon to say, but obviously pretty gutted, especially the last 6 years. None of anything that I've written and anything I've included is ever intended to hurt my family.
There is a moment in Tom Bower's research that sources say stopped several people cold when they first heard it. Not the clause itself, not the financial figures, not the custody jurisdiction mandate. The moment when investigators allegedly tried to reconstruct exactly who was present when Harry signed, and realized who wasn't. No senior palace legal advisor, no independent counsel appointed specifically to represent Harry's personal interests, no long-standing royal aide who had navigated complex legal arrangements on behalf of the family before. Just Harry, Meghan's team, and a stack of documents that sources suggest ran to considerable length. Indeed it was. That image, a prince sitting across from a table of Hollywood lawyers with nobody in his corner, is the image sources say explains everything that allegedly followed. But to understand how Harry ended up in that room, you have to go back further. Because it did not happen suddenly, it happened gradually over months through a process that sources familiar with Bauer's research describe with one specific word: isolation. Not dramatic isolation, not the kind that raises immediate alarm bells. The quiet, incremental kind. The kind that gradually puts one in disarray and leaves them stranded when they find out. Harry's isolation during the engagement period has been documented in multiple credible sources. Bauer's revenge covered it in detail. Other royal biographers have noted the same pattern independently. Long-standing aides found their access reduced. Friends who had known Harry for years described attempts to raise gentle concerns being met with defensiveness. Staff who had served him loyally across years of royal duties had found themselves gradually moved to the periphery. And at the center of that shrinking circle was Meghan. Now, it is important to say something clearly here. None of that makes Meghan a villain in any simple sense. Harry is a grown man. He made his own choices. He reduced his own circle. He made his own decisions about whom to trust and whom to distance himself from. But sources suggest the emotional environment he was operating in during that period affected his judgment in ways that had practical and allegedly legal consequences. Here is how the sources put it. The wedding preparation period in early 2018 was, by all accounts, extraordinarily intense. Logistics on a scale that most people cannot imagine, global media attention, security arrangements, and family dynamics that were already showing signs of strain. The Thomas Markle situation alone, his staged paparazzi photographs, his subsequent heart attack, his ultimately not attending the wedding, created a chaotic emotional backdrop in the weeks immediately before the ceremony. In that environment, sources suggest certain legal paperwork was presented to Harry in a way that framed it as routine, standard documentation, necessary formalities connected to the marriage and their shared future. Sources suggest Harry was told the documents were primarily about protecting their joint interests, their shared projects, their planned transition away from traditional royal roles towards something more independent. That framing, sources allege, was not entirely accurate, because while Harry may have understood he was signing agreements connected to their future together, sources suggest he did not understand the specific provisions buried within those agreements. The title, retention language, the escalating financial structure, the California jurisdiction mandate over the children. Those details, sources allege, were not walked through with Harry in plain language by anyone whose job it was to represent his interests specifically. And here is where the palace warning dimension of this story becomes significant. Because Harry was not without people trying to reach him during that period, sources suggest that senior figures connected to the palace, including people close to William, made attempts to encourage Harry to ensure he had genuinely independent legal representation before signing any significant documents. Not attacks on Meghan, not attempts to derail the wedding, but practical, specific advice about the importance of having his own lawyers review everything thoroughly. Harry reportedly dismissed those approaches. In his own public statements across various interviews and in Spare, Harry has described the warnings he received about Meghan during the engagement period as motivated by racism, institutional prejudice, and a desire to control him. He framed the palace's concerns as attacks on the woman he loved rather than legitimate practical counsel. Sources suggest that framing, however understandable given Harry's complicated relationship with the institution, may have caused him to reject advice that was genuinely in his interest. The result allegedly being that when the documents were placed in front of him, Harry signed them without the independent legal scrutiny that might have flagged what they actually contained. A man who trusted the wrong people completely and allegedly distrusted the right people entirely. That combination, sources suggest, is exactly what the people on the other side of that table were counting on. What Bauer's research uncovered and its implications is something you wouldn't want to hear, but that is what's coming next. What Bauer's research allegedly reveals and why it matters right now.
Have to give up milk deliveries. But I do think that when you're mocked so publicly as they've been, their value begins to nosedive.
Something shifted in the Sussex public narrative in late 2024. It was not one dramatic moment, no single headline, no explosive interview, just a quiet but unmistakable change in the pattern of how Harry and Meghan were presenting themselves to the world. Separately. Not always, not completely, but noticeably more than before. Meghan launched her lifestyle brand as ever in early 2025. Solo. Her own name, her own identity front and center. The brand's aesthetic, its tone, its entire public positioning was built around Meghan specifically, not the Sussexes, not a joint venture, but Meghan. At least she had the opportunity to express her versatility. Harry, meanwhile, has been increasingly visible in his own separate lane. His Invictus Games work, his mental health advocacy, and his legal battles against British tabloids, which he has pursued with a determination that has often pulled him back into the British media conversation independently of Meghan. Two people, one marriage, increasingly distinct public identities. This wasn't the plan, but sometimes life can't be predicted. Sources familiar with Bauer's research say the pattern is not coincidental, and they say Bauer has been watching it closely, maybe not see gaps, but to document their lifestyle. Here is the core question this section needs to answer. Why now? Why are details about an alleged legal clause from a marriage that took place in 2018 only surfacing with this level of specificity in 2025 and 2026? The answer sources give is straightforward, and no sentiments, just the honest answer. Because now it is relevant in a way it was not before. Legal agreements sit dormant until the circumstances they were designed for begin to materialize. A clause about title retention in the event of divorce is theoretical when a marriage appears stable. It becomes practically significant when the marriage shows visible signs of strain. A financial structure tied to the duration of a marriage matters differently in year 3 than it does in year 7. Sources suggest Bauer's ongoing research has been tracking the Sussex situation with exactly that lens, not as gossip, but as documentation, watching the public signals against the backdrop of what his sources have allegedly told him about the legal architecture underneath. And sources say what he is allegedly seeing now is a picture that the alleged clause was specifically written to produce. And Meghan builds independent commercial infrastructure around her own identity and title, her own brand, her own platform, and her own revenue streams that do not depend on Harry's participation. Harry's earning power continues to generate income that allegedly feeds the escalating financial structure sources described within the agreement. The children establish themselves in California with their lives, their schooling, and their social world entirely rooted in American soil under American jurisdiction. Each of those developments, sources suggest, is a piece of a picture that looks very different when you know about the alleged clause than it does when you don't. Now let's talk about the palace reaction, because Charles and William have not been passive observers of the Sussex situation. Sources suggest that when details about the alleged clause began circulating among people connected to royal legal circles, the reaction inside the palace was swift, not panicked, but serious. King Charles's legal team allegedly began reviewing the situation to assess what implications the alleged agreement might have for the royal family institutionally, specifically around the title question. The Duchess of Sussex title was granted by the Crown. The idea that its commercial use could be contractually protected in a private legal agreement in ways that bypass royal family oversight raises constitutional questions that sources describe as genuinely complex. William's reaction, sources say, was different in character. Less focused on the legal technicalities, more focused on what the alleged clause represents about the nature of the Sussex marriage from its very beginning. Sources describe William as grimly unsurprised, not because he had specific prior knowledge of the alleged clause, but because the pattern it allegedly represents aligns with concerns he raised privately years ago. Concerns Harry dismissed, concerns that William apparently never fully stopped believing were valid. The alleged clause, in William's view, as sources describe it, is not an isolated legal instrument. It is evidence of an intention, a deliberate strategy constructed around Harry before the wedding flowers were even ordered. A plan that treated the marriage not primarily as a love story, but as a structure. a vehicle, a means to an end. Whether that characterization is fair to Meghan is a genuinely complicated question. People protect themselves legally. Experienced professionals draft agreements that anticipate worst-case scenarios. That is not automatically sinister, but sources suggest the specific provisions allegedly contained in this clause go beyond standard protective language into something more deliberately constructed. And Harry, sources allege, is only now beginning to understand the full scope of what he agreed to. 7 years into a marriage, 2 children deep, his entire post-royal financial life built on the foundation of the Sussex brand, and allegedly reading the fine print for the first time. The question of what he does with that understanding, what it means for the children, what it means for his relationship with the royal family, and what the end game of all of this actually looks like. That is the final piece of this story. Endgame. What happens when the clock runs out?
I feel most sorry about are the trolls who their hopes are just built and built and built, and it's like yes, and then it doesn't happen.
Back in Hollywood.
Harry made a phone call to William in early 2025 that sources describe as unlike any conversation the brothers had shared in years. The call was everything. Not hostile, not the tense, guarded exchanges that have characterized their relationship since the Megxit fallout. Something different. Quieter, more uncertain. Sources suggest Harry was asking questions not about the monarchy, not about titles or security, or the ongoing legal disputes that have kept him tethered to British courts across multiple cases, but something far bigger. About lawyers, specifically about independent legal counsel, operating completely outside any connection to Meghan's professional circle. William apparently gave him a name. Whether Harry used it, sources do not confirm. But the fact that he was asking the question at all tells you something significant about where things allegedly stand inside that marriage right now. Because men who are confident in their legal position do not call their estranged brothers asking for lawyer recommendations. Men who have just started reading the fine print do. Now let's lay out the full picture of what the alleged clause means practically, because the implications stretch across every dimension of Harry's life simultaneously. Harry's financial position since leaving royal life has been built almost entirely on the Sussex brand. The Netflix deal reportedly worth around $100 million. The Spare memoir advance of approximately $20 million. Speaking engagements commanding fees of around $1 million per appearance at peak. Invictus Games, sponsorships, and partnerships. Every single one of those revenue streams is connected directly or indirectly to Harry's identity as the Duke of Sussex and Meghan's husband. The brand power of the Sussex name is a joint asset. It is not Harry alone, it is not Meghan alone. It is the combination, if the alleged financial clause is structured the way sources describe, with an escalating settlement figure calculated against Harry's total earnings during the marriage. Then the more successful the Sussex brand has become, the larger the alleged figure Harry would owe in a divorce scenario. He has spent 7 years building the very financial engine that allegedly funds his own exposure. Sources suggest that when this implication is laid out plainly, even people who have followed the Sussex story closely find it difficult to absorb. Now the title. Meghan's As Ever brand launched in 2025 to significant commercial success. The brand is built explicitly around the Duchess of Sussex identity. Meghan's team has been careful to establish it as her independent platform, separate from any joint Sussex venture. If the alleged title retention clause exists as sources describe, that brand does not disappear in a divorce. It continues under the Duchess of Sussex name, commercially protected, generating revenue that has no connection to Harry's participation or approval. Meghan would walk away from the marriage with the title, the brand infrastructure built around it, and the commercial rights to continue using both. Harry would walk away with significantly depleted financial resources and a royal identity that, without the Sussex brand behind it, has considerably less commercial value than it does today. The asymmetry of that outcome, sources suggest, is not accidental. And then there are Archie and Lilibet. This is the dimension that sources describe as hitting Harry hardest when the full implications of the alleged custody jurisdiction clause allegedly became clear to him. Archie is 6 years old. Lilibet is 3. They have grown up entirely in California. Their lives, their friendships, their schools, their entire world is American. Getting a California family court to move them to the United Kingdom against the wishes of their primary California-based parent would be, under standard California family law, extraordinarily difficult. Sources suggest the alleged clause makes it effectively impossible, looking from several angles. For Charles, already a grandfather who has had painfully limited access to his Sussex grandchildren, this dimension of the alleged agreement represents something deeply personal, the possibility that a legal document allegedly signed before those children were even born has permanently determined that they will grow up beyond the reach of the royal family, regardless of what happens between their parents. Sources say Charles finds that particular implication genuinely distressing. For William, it represents something more strategic. The Sussex children carry royal blood. Their relationship with the British royal family, with its history and its future, matters institutionally. A California custody mandate does not simply affect Harry personally, it affects the monarchy's long-term family architecture. And there is nothing William can do about it, nothing Charles can do, nothing the palace lawyers can do. Because if the alleged clause is valid and enforceable, the decision was made in 2018. In a room Harry allegedly did not fully understand he was sitting in, by people who allegedly understood exactly what they were building. Sources suggest Harry is now living inside the structure those people constructed. Every day the marriage continues, every dollar earned, and every morning Archie and Lilibet wake up in their California home. It's a different scenario for Harry altogether, and the clock that was allegedly started when Harry picked up that pin is still running, and from the look of things, it is loud for everyone to hear. Harry walked into that wedding as a prince in love. He may be walking out of it as a man who signed away more than he ever realized, and the consequences from the look of things will be fatal. The title, the money, the children, all of it allegedly locked in before the vows were even exchanged. Tom Bower pulled the thread, and everything attached to it is still unraveling. The real question is not whether this clause exists. The real question is what Harry does now that he allegedly knows. What will be his response to it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Was Harry naive, or was he deliberately kept in the dark?